Hello and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined as always by James and Alan. James, I'll come to you first this week. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. A nice one of those weekends where I planted my extra large ass on the couch for copious amounts of time watching football and American football. It's the playoff weekend started in American football this week. So that ends up in a lot of time eating food that I shouldn't be eating, consuming alcoholic beverages, and scratching places that no one wants to hear about.
Absolutely, we'll leave it at that, I think. But just remember, James, sitting is the new smoking, so make sure and move that extra large ass as much as you can over the next few weeks. Alan, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too shabby. I mean, a little bit similar, but without all the grunting and scratching and other unpleasantries that James mentioned. Been a bit icebound, actually. I have to, with my shiny new hip, I just have to be a little bit careful. I don't want to be going twisting and sliding about on the ice. I've been a bit kind of introspective about going out on it, to be honest. It's only just started to thaw, but I did make up for it with a good Pilates session this morning, so I'm feeling particularly virtuous.
Pilates, my goodness, that came out of left field.
Good.
Well, you're both getting more movement in than me, because I did exactly what James did, except without all the scratching, so I didn't even move that much. So
you were doing the grunting and the...
Well, yeah.
What's next, Alan? Hot yoga, or what's going on here? I didn't make you out for a trendy yuppie dude.
Well, it's just the fact that I've got to get my hips flex, improved my flexibility and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty good for people our age, James. It's actually pretty good stuff.
Core strength. That's what they tell me. I need to work on core
strengthen your core and all that. It's
flexibility.
All good.
Yeah. Can't relate to any of that.
Yeah, now he's part human, part Terminator. So there we go. It's like he's good to go. Good to go.
Good for another 100,000 kilometers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to this past weekend. And I'll be honest, James, I'll come to you first. I had to Google the score just before we came on air because of the way it ended the game. I couldn't exactly remember the score because we just piled in a few goals right at the end there. It seems to be a sort of something that we're known for doing, is scoring late goals up at Ross County. But what was your overall thoughts on the game and how we performed?
Well, in fairness to their keeper, I think he just got tired. He had enough because he was quite good for most of the game, but was being bombarded, particularly in let's say the first half of the second half. So yeah, maybe he just his hands were bruised or something. But I'll say this: it was going in the right direction, going in a good direction. Been looking for marginal improvement relative to kind of these narrow, organized, compact defensive setups, and I think for most of, if not all of the first half, that describes Ross County for the most part. They had some different nuances. They have a different kind of setup with that. I guess it's like a 3-5-2 with a diamond in the middle or something, which is not something that we've seen, I don't think, with any kind of frequency this season. So there were some of those nuances. Obviously, we had the positional differences with all of the absences and Kyogo playing out wide right. So that was a very interesting nuance, and there's some. I'm sure Alan's got some good thoughts on that, having captured the data for the game and rewatching it. So, I think it was progress in the right direction. I think relative to Kyogo's role and vital role in this game, doing something that he hasn't really done that much, I think that would be an obvious question, which is, okay, well, are we able to replicate some of the positives coming out of this when he's not in that role? So I think that'll be an interesting question that gets answered as we move forward. But yeah, overall, it's in this long odyssey of game after game after game after game to go up to Dingwall in those conditions and basically blow them out like this, particularly in the second half, I thought was gratifying.
It was indeed. Alan, I'll come to you. We have a wider conversation to have, obviously, that we discussed before we came on about the number of changes in the squad, and we'll get into a few of those. But picking up on what James said about Kyogo, I text you guys during the match to talk about how I felt using the eye test as I do, that he was a lot more involved in the game. And while that might not necessarily be to do with Kyogo as an individual player, it certainly says a lot about the system that we play, and perhaps that using him in that area might be a better use of him, basically, because he's seeing more of the ball. What did you make of his performance on at the weekend, and is there anything to suggest that maybe there's options for him to play elsewhere other than the sort of lone ranger up top?
Yeah. I mean, it was an interesting performance. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed the game. I mean, and this is probably a bit of outcome bias, but I was actually kind of pretty happy with the performance in terms of, we moved the ball reasonably quickly, created plenty of chances. There were big chances being created from like the 8th minute onwards and steadily throughout the game. Kept kicking the ball straight at the goalkeeper, like literally in the middle of the goal, just kick it right at him with no power. That seemed to be the kind of trend of the day. But apart from that, I thought it was actually quite enjoyable. I think Baye adds a bit of fun to things. There's a bit of unpredictability. Kyogo out wide was interesting. He didn't start out wide. That was the funny thing. He more or less started as a number 10. And we had this kind of interesting arrangement where Yang was keeping the width on the left and Johnson was keeping the width on the right. And the two strikers were kind of in the middle, maybe Kyogo a little bit deeper, but it kind of altered because Ida kept doing this thing where he comes deep. And then I was becoming StatsBomb's OBV model in my head every time Ida got the ball around the halfway line and passed it backwards. And especially the times he made his centre backs turn and have to run towards their own goal to get the ball. I was thinking, I could just see the negative OBV on that pass. It must be, I could just work it all out in my head. I was kind of this virtual OBV AI machine. I was turning into, this metal in my hip is kind of extended to my head, sort of thing. So actually, Kyogo was often the furthest forward, and then in the second half, he just went orthodox right wing. So I think one of the issues was that Johnson just wasn't getting in the game. Johnson pushing right up was actually, stunting his contribution to the game. Even though I thought we made plenty of chances with Kyogo in that role. And there was even a moment in the first half when it was like we did a sort of 70s throwback where somebody launched the ball into the box and the big man dotted it down to the wee man, and the wee man had a chance, and it was like Toshak and Keegan or Peter With and Gary Shaw. I know you're looking at me, aren't you, Laura, going, what the hell is he talking about? This is really old school 70s football, right? So it was brilliant.
My mum really fancied Kevin Keegan, if that helps at all.
Yeah, it helps enormously. You've heard of Kevin Keegan, right? So this idea that British football really was dominated by the idea that you had a big lad and a little lad up front, and you launched the ball at the big lad, and the big lad flicked it on, and the wee lad kind of nipped in. That was essentially the tactical breakthrough of the 70s in a nutshell. And so it was a throwback to that. I just thought it was brilliant because you'd never see Celtic creating a chance like that. When do you ever see Celtic launch it to the big lad, nod it down to the 6-yard box, and the wee lad nips in with a chance? That cheered me up no end. I don't think I ever recovered from the glow of that moment, and that's kind of made me feel upbeat about the game ever since. So that was brilliant. But apart from that, there wasn't a lot of connectivity between the two, if I'm honest. One of the things that is fascinating, and perhaps the most fascinating artifact out of the game, if you want to compare the two players, is on SofaScore. You can get the individual player heat maps from the game, and they are fascinating. If we look at Adamida, there are 4 red blotches. So red is kind of hot, meaning that's where they kind of were on the ball quite a lot. Yellow is they were on the ball a fair amount. And then obviously where there isn't any kind of red or yellowy colours, then they're not on the ball at all. So apologies we don't have the technology for me to bring this up onto the screen. I would love to be able to do that. But essentially, Adamida's hotspots in terms of getting the ball are 3 of them are kind of around the halfway line. Just either side of the centre circle, and the other one is near the left corner flag, and that's it. In terms of penalty area and just outside the penalty area in 10 position, there's a bit of activity, but not a lot. And for Kyogo, there's a little red oasis out on the sort of the right wing between the box and the halfway line where you'd kind of expect a right-sided midfielder to play. That's all good. And then there's a really intense and quite large red blob just at in the middle of the 6-yard box where you'd expect Kyogo to be. And what that shows to me, what that suggests, these heat maps they're averages, so they're not perfect by any means. But in this particular case, I think they're a brilliant way of articulating the brilliance of Kyogo's movement in the match and the way that he hit the box at the right time. His movement for the 2 goals was world class, right? The way he lost his defenders and arrived with perfect timing on each of the chances to finish with a first time left foot shot and a first time header. But he held his position. So in terms of team discipline, he held his position and he kind of linked play. So to give you some idea, the only other match this season that Kyogo has had more than 10, in fact, not even 10, more than 6 open play completed passes was the first game of the season against Kilmarnock. And then 20, where he had 17. And then in this match, he had 23 completed passes. But he still managed to get 6 touches in the box, which is more than he's had in each of the last 3 matches. So he was getting involved. He was getting into the right areas to support the striking options, and he was also disciplined and holding his position and keeping the team shape on the right. Now, he wasn't kind of driving past people and running with the ball like Yang does. He was kind of giving it and going. It was a lot of kind of quick 1-2 passing. That was his modus operandi, really. But the heat maps of the 2 nominal strikers are fascinating because Kyogo is just the epitome of efficiency and being in the right place at the right time and being disciplined and playing for the team. Ida is just all over the place, and what I'm worried about with Ida, and these are kind of non-data driven things, but they're inferred from the data a little bit, and I'm letting the data guide me, but not like Brendan Rodgers, but not dictate to me. Is he just doesn't seem to be in the right place. He doesn't seem to be where you want him to be as a striker, as a number 9 for Celtic. You need him to be in those little spaces that Kyogo finds on the edge of the 6-yard box. That's where you need him. Because again, we put in a number of balls into that area, again, like we had done in the game against Dundee United, where you're really expecting him to be there, really, to finish those chances as Kyogo would be. But he tends to drift about, and as the stats bomb on ball value model that I was kind of joking about earlier, but what it does show you is that when he gets involved and gets the ball near the halfway line and passes it all the way back, it has a really bad impact on his OBV value. But that this isn't an academic thing. This is how much are you helping your team, in terms of the probability of scoring a goal. Well, in those situations, not much. So he's wandering about a lot. And my overriding eye test watching him is 2 things, right, which are not very kind of data driven, but I'll put them out there for your discussion. One is, to my mind, he overcomplicates the game. So whereas Kyogo is the epitome of efficiency and ruthlessness and being at the right place at the right time, timing, movement off the ball, really thoughtful, really clever. There's lots of movement into areas of the pitch that he's not really adding any value. And there's lots of little flicks and which I'll admit that I have a negative bias against people that kind of flick the ball off all the time. He just seems to complicate the game. And he could really do with somebody getting hold of him and simplifying his game, like Kyogo's, in terms of, I want you to make runs when the ball's wide. I want you to make runs into that area, that corridor, that danger zone in front of the goal, for example. Just simplify your game. And the other thing is, and this is going to cause a lot of stir, and I know, but he does come across on the pitch as being a very languid, kind of laid back sort of guy. I'm just looking for a bit more intensity and focus about his game. He just seems to kind of, lollop through the game looking, oh, yeah, this is quite fun, like a Sunday league player almost. And I'm sure that's very unfair. I'm not saying he isn't trying. I can see that he's trying. And the longer he goes without a goal, the harder he will try. I just think he needs focus and just that sort of ruthlessness that Kyogo has, that laser-like concentration about where should I be, when should I be making my runs, the timing of them, all of those things, as I say, because he just doesn't seem to be in the right place at the right time. And I do worry about that. But physically, he's got everything that you'd want in a striker. But we're just not seeing producing the right moments and getting on the ball in the right areas for me. So that was, and I thought this game was a very useful way of very sharply bringing into focus that contrast. And as I say, the heat maps were an interesting way of kind of highlighting that. And I'll probably drop them into some kind of post maybe tomorrow.
James, I'll come back to you on that. We'll talk about Kyogo after, but just to follow up immediately on Alan's points about Adam Idah, certainly from my point of view, I think I said something to that effect last week of he is most dangerous in the box, and unfortunately we don't always see him there, and Alan said that about him just not seeming to be in the right place. He reminds me a little bit of what used to frustrate me when I watched a lot more of Harry Kane before he went to Bayern Munich, not the good bits of Harry Kane, but the bits of Harry Kane that were a little bit undisciplined and coming back almost. With Kane, I think it was a frustration at not being involved in the game and wanting to come back to get more involved in the game. With Idah, I don't know that it's that. And I can't decide for myself whether he's tactically undisciplined or whether he is doing exactly as Rodgers has asked. The only problem is, if he's doing exactly as Rodgers has asked, I can't really see the logic behind it, because we've got plenty other players that can create things. What's your opinion on what Alan said and on Adam Idah in general? Is he doing, do you think, as he's asked? Is he not doing as he's asked? What do you think?
My guess is he's trying to do what he's asked with some pretty decent amount of variability around that, to Alan's point, meaning that he's kind of all over the place at times. And it is this interesting, significant contrast with Kyogo, not only because of that kind of very disciplined, excellent movement of Kyogo versus what Idah does, but how, Idah's actually, like, his decision making around the box looks pretty good. Like he seems to make smart shooting decisions. He's not some guy just lashes out at shots because he's on the ball and gets half a yard of space. Like, he seems to be an intelligent player around the box. Like the header. I mean, the irony is, he'll get huge OBV credit for that kind of pass because it set up a goal scoring opportunity. It was a very high XG. So this is one of his higher games where he actually had material positive impact on the game on the ball. My criticism is most of the time he's not in a position. Now, whether this is a good question, Laura, how much of it's because of the role he's being asked to play, and how much is it his, I'll characterize this, it might not be fair, but lack of discipline within what he's being asked to do, or just muscle memory of doing it the way that Rodgers would want. So we don't know what that nebulous is and where it falls. But I just don't think he's been put in positions, or he's put himself in positions where he thrives and does well. And as a result of that, he's doing a lot more of stuff, as Alan points out, that he either isn't good at, or is actually counterproductive to the team. And so I've said this before, I'd love to see him more of a box striker. I think that fact that, Kyogo was the nominal right winger and moving in and being the one to connect with him at times was also notable, because I go back to this, and I'll transition into the Kyogo topic real quick, is I've, mostly tongue in cheek, or bit my tongue. But this idea, these debates about whether Kyogo shouldn't be the starting striker, I've found absolute lunacy the entire time. In my mind, there's just no comparison in level of quality between the two players, and what Kyogo can do. And I think part of that is because of his flexibility. And this is not out of nowhere. I mean, he played mostly in other positions, not at striker when he was in Japan, and at a really good level. So he's been all over the pitch at times. He's played at a 10 for us. He's played on the wing some, obviously all this time at striker. And with that game now on the weekend, obviously in a different kind of role, but overall, his XG now and post shot XG are higher by a material amount than it was in his best season under Ange. And Alan talked about this beautifully a couple of weeks ago. The main difference is he's not scoring at the same rate. He was scoring at this ridiculous, basically one non-penalty goal per game in league games that season. And guess what? I talk about this all the time. The main driver in that was something he has no control over, which was how the keepers did in saving his shots, because they were, roughly the same quality of shots or chances, I should say. And in fairness, his post shot, like his average finishing has been down a little bit this year. So that, in fairness, it hasn't been his best finishing season. But most of it's opposition keeper play. So he's at like 2/3 of a goal per game, or game equivalent, versus 1. So that feels like he's not scoring as much, but he's averaging basically the same XG per shot. And he's up a shot per game, a whole shot. So the reason why his XG per game is up, and I have to look like it. I think it's even higher than like Edouard's 1920 level, which was, crazy town, Edouard, when he was on fire that season. And so he's averaging like over 4 shots a game. So he's all these things we talk about. Oh, he's not getting enough chances. He's not, like, that's really not the case. He's basically been Kyogo the whole time with a little bit of dip in finishing, and keepers, stopping his shots a little better. So, but to your point, Laura, he was on the ball an insane amount. It was like 5, 6, 7, 8 times more than what he normally is in that other role. But to me, the part of that speaks to his quality, which is he's able to play that other role. It's not me, let me go get on the ball, because he could certainly do that and actually be a positive contributor in doing it. He's playing a role. And in fairness, at times last season, particularly early in the season, he did play more of that role. And for whatever reason, they made the decision to revert back to more of, Ange season 2 Kyogo, which is maybe touch the ball 10 times in the game. And that's almost it. And I think it was first half, he was at 50 or something. I mean, it was crazy. Like, it was not even, it was totally different ballpark because of this different role. But that's how good of a player he is. He can be not only functional, but really good in multiple roles. So I say, if it's to get more out of Ida, to get him to focus more centrally and have him not have to do more of that other stuff that's counterproductive, if part of making that happen is having Kyogo play a different role to facilitate that, I'm all for it. Because I don't think Kuhn has the same quality that Kyogo does on the ball. I mean, he's a different kind of player. He's more explosive, he's more dynamic, but he's not as that touch, these moves where he has these the first touch, that qualitative aspect of the quality that he has in being able to do things in link up play. And, that brilliant goal he had where he flicked it from behind and one touch and then scores, it's that kind of stuff. It's just that quality he has is there's no one else on the team that has it. So whatever role it is, and the combinations, and that continues to be kind of my bewilderment with the second Rodgers tenure, has been really the lack of tinkering. Like, it's so crazy. I was looking at something again, writing a couple of columns early in the week here for huddlebreakdown.com. And I was looking back at a 2-0 loss that we had. I was looking at Emilio Izaguirre's second tenure at Celtic, obvious thing that everyone wants to look at. And there was a
great evening's reading, I hear.
Yes, yeah, a 2-0 loss at Easter Road in December 2018. We played 3-5-2 with Scott Sinclair as a right wing back and Izaguirre as the left wing back. Right? Where the hell did I mean, that's like so far flung from anything that we've seen in the second tenure. So like I think putting Kyogo in some of these other roles, I'd be all for it. Tinkering a little bit if he's here by the end of the month, which we'll get into later. But
yeah, that's some of your compatriots' fault that might have got leaked a little bit early. Just to get your thoughts on that before we move on to anything else, James, let's just cut right to that. How did that happen? I mean, I'm not suggesting that the story isn't true. I fully expect Kyogo to be announced as an Atlanta United player at the end of the January transfer window. I've no doubt that there's some sort of deal being put in place where Brendan Rodgers or Celtic have said, can we keep him until we get these last couple of Champions League games out the way and qualify, or something to that effect. But I mean, we've all worked, we're not, none of us here are qualified journalists, but we've all worked in the online space for a while and writing columns and things like that. How does something like that, a company of that size, end up getting published when it's so wrong?
Well, some of us aren't qualified for anything, so let's start there. I put my hand up there. So that's what's so weird about MLS is because it's this single entity thing. They have this mega hub in Manhattan, which is where the Borg is, which is all the centralized league personnel are. And then they, from what I know, and again, I'm not an aficionado or I'm not an expert on anything, but I don't know that much about MLS. But from what I do know is that the like the PR people and the local people in each franchise in each town or city, they're controlling like their local stuff. They're not handling the big stuff, like the all the designated player and the big name talent that comes in, like Messi or Beckham and Ibrahimovic or those type of, that's all being centrally planned, and the messaging and the PR campaigns that go around that. So I suspect they go through a lot of prep stuff and scenario analysis of what the clubs are doing on those designated players, and somebody just screwed up, like literally posted something when they shouldn't have, hit the wrong button, and it flashed up, and it was probably a locked and loaded one if it does happen, because they did end up signing, I think, another Japanese striker, and there's been rumors now maybe it's his negotiating tactic or whatever, but a Middlesbrough striker too. So I don't know. I suspect, to me, it makes sense. Each agent's in the summer. I'm with Alan. Like wouldn't, it sounds like you too, Laura. Like I'd be surprised if he's still here by the end of the window, but be a pleasant surprise. Like that'd be great. But yeah, it most likely just basic human error in the Borg.
Alan, we'll get back to the football in a second, but I may as well get your thoughts on this while we're on the subject. I mean, one doesn't like to think that he has just simply Googled Japanese striker to put a name in the article and it's come up with somebody other than the guy that they signed and come up with Furuhashi instead. But I mean, I guess my question to you is, are you any more certain that he's going to be away because that happened, or is it in spite of that?
No, I'm not certain either way. I think from the little that I know, I think there's substance to this, and I don't know why. I mean, Kyogo's been here for a while, like you say, changed agent. Maybe the agent's kind of, trying to stoke up interest in him because at the age he's at, he's probably got one really good contract left in him, in that sense. I mean, maybe he's had enough of Scotland. I mean, he does get kicked around a lot. Maybe he just doesn't like that anymore and wants to try somewhere that's a little bit more civilized in terms of the style of football. I don't know, but I think there is substance to it. I think as I've said before, the transfer window, because of the two things really, especially in Europe, right? The Champions League campaigns running through to the end of January, not being able to add to them. You've got to use the squad that you declared when the competition started. Therefore, you're going to be loath to release players from your Champions League squad if you're involved in that competition. And also, it's going to be difficult to add players with that kind of, hook because you've still got a couple more games to play. You don't know where you're going to be. Maybe certainly Celtic won't until the end of January. So I think that complicates things on top of the complications that have been caused by planning out what needs to be a multi-year view on your situation as regards financial sustainability rules and the various pillars therein in terms of your profitability, your wage ratios, all that, right? So that complicates things, and we're in the sort of 80. We're in the middle year now. We're in the 80% year in terms of wage ratios. That we got dropped down to 70% next year. So you got to be thinking about that. You got to be planning for that. If you're anywhere near that headroom, you got to think carefully about who comes in, who comes out, and and therefore it probably increases the likelihood of there being dependencies, as in we can't get a new strike until this person goes out and all that sort of thing, right? Because we've got to keep within these ratios and so forth. So I just think it's a really complicated picture, and probably the planning tools that the clubs are using at the financial level are probably still being kind of kicked around and stress tested. And now people are probably not totally sure that if we press the button on that deal, what's the kind of long term impact? All of those things. I mean, I might be overstating this, but it's just the feeling that I get really. So for all those reasons, even Celtic, we need to think carefully about selling a player like Kyogo, especially if it jeopardises Champions League places, because that's a material impact to Celtic's financial performance as well as footballing performance. So they won't be looking to get rid of him, I would say, before the end of the month, certainly. And then you've got to be thinking, well, we expect to get through. The odds are Celtic will get through. We know it's going to come down to this one game against Young Boys in reality, which is always a risk. But then you've got to think, well, if we do sell Kyogo, then who do we get in? And are they happy to come in on that basis? And is the timing right for the selling club? Because for example, the MLS season hasn't started, but it's kind of the Scandinavian seasons that haven't started yet, and everyone's in different stages of their campaigns and all of those things. So I just think it's that to me suggests that the path of least resistance is do nothing. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these deals don't kind of materialise till the end of our season. If I'm honest with you, because it just sounds all really too much complication for people. But I think there is something in this with Kyogo. But I think it'd have to take a hell of a deal to get rid of him while Celtic are still in the Champions League for sure. So we'll see on that one, I guess.
I think just one quick addendum before we move on. I think that the MLS window is open into March or to the beginning of March. So I don't know the rules, but I don't know why Celtic couldn't sell him even after as an outbound player to MLS after even the knockout stage, hopefully that we qualify for, which I believe would be like the second week of February. So that seems like that could even be a plausible scenario, which is, basically as long as we're in the Champions League, he stays here. And then, if and when we get knocked out, then maybe that's when it gets consummated.
Am I right in thinking Abada went to Charlotte outside what would have been our transfer window, so it would be something similar to that?
Yeah, I think that ended up getting signed and sealed in February, I think. So, yep, I think that's the case.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one to follow anyway. I just think as in so many of these situations, there's no smoke without fire, and certainly if it's not Atlanta he ends up at, the way the MLS works, I'm sure he'll find, what is the terminology, James? He'll find a franchise to call home.
A franchise, yeah, they're franchises.
Yeah. And then they'll up sticks and move it to another city, probably. Yeah.
Probably.
He could go across the city in Glasgow to a franchise there, and they've got lots of money, haven't they?
No, he wants to go somewhere with...
If they don't sack Philippe Clement, they'll have loads of cash, right?
He wants to go somewhere with a bit of history, Alan. Come on. But
Atlanta.
Atlanta or the San Jose Earthquakes or whatever they're called. I don't know.
Right.
New York Cosmos. I hear they're good.
They actually have some history, at least relative to Atlanta, for goodness sakes.
Yeah. So no, we'll keep an eye on that anyway and see how it goes. We're running tight for time, so we might not get to transfers quite yet, but it is early in January. I'm sure there'll be more to talk about as far as that's concerned later on in the month. What we'll prioritise for now, and James, I'll come to you on this first. is the Dundee game coming up tomorrow night. We are away at Dens Park. Obviously, we saw quite a few changes to the lineup at the weekend. It's likely that will happen again, given the frequency of the games. One player that I'm interested to see how he does tomorrow night is Arne Engels. He had a kind of very prominent role at the weekend again. Alan said before we started he was getting played in yet another different role. How do you think we'll deploy him if he takes to the field at Dens Park tomorrow night?
Good question. I wish I knew. He's become the utility man of the infield as far as kind of being moved around, and even within the different roles. Like for the most part, he's got. It seems like there's a lot of dynamic movement, and kind of. I'm sure there's a degree of patterns being set up, organization to it, or at least conditional organization. But he was kind of all over the place, and he and Hatate were very much interchanging, and with Kyogo doing what he was doing, like it was a pretty dynamic movement in the game. It was one of his better games, I thought. What I've been saying is that his movement's been good. He's been getting on the ball a lot, and then what he's done on the ball once he's there in open play has kind of been at times. Generally speaking, on average, not great, with some highlights and some pretty good points. I thought this game he was generally pretty good. He once again showing he's very good at crossing the ball. So you can see why even at Augsburg they would play him out wide at times. And those kind of early deep crosses, he's very skilled at whipping them in. So I'll be anxious to see once again. I mean, some of that has to do with selection. It's another one of these tight turnarounds, Saturday into a Tuesday game. So that's I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be material rotation again. At least 3 or 4 guys would make sense based off of how the club's been handling this fixture congestion. So. If he even plays, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he's one of the guys that gets rotated, at least from a starting position. But I just want to keep seeing him progress in that regard. Now, again, I don't think it's Ross County. We always have to caveat they don't. While they were relatively well set up, particularly in the first half, they don't have kind of dynamic midfielders that are going to create the kind of headaches that worry me more with Engels. Quite frankly, Dundee doesn't appear to either. So I don't think this is going to be a game.
We took their only one, I think.
Well, and I think Dundee's a level above Ross County, but and they'll be at home. So obviously I think that they'll maybe have a little bit more of an edge because of that. But I look forward to finding out, like everyone else, what they come up with for him for this game, if he's actually in fact starts. Which again, my base case would probably be no. Actually, I mean that's something I think people are that's underappreciated with Engels. He's barely played senior football. Like he's played a lot in a sense of each season he's played material amount of minutes, but he's not a guy that's played 3,000 or 3,500 minutes in a season. He's basically been like 1,500, 1,700, and that the way we play in this time of the year, like you blink after a month and a half and you're, 20 games in and the amount of minutes that can pile up. So I wouldn't be surprised if he already went through some of that. Might have been to protect him and helping him with his development, and sentiment had gotten a little, the pressure cooker had been turned up on him a little bit. But I'd also wonder if they'll be smart in rotating him a little bit, because he doesn't have the mileage on his tires to be able to say, hey, this guy can reliably play 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 minutes, which is kind of classic Celtic starter, like starting 11 player, and not incur, soft tissue injuries and that kind of thing. So my guess is he's rotated. Long-winded way of saying it.
Yeah, I mean, muscle injuries is definitely a big concern. Look at what happened with Nicholas Kuhn the other day, having to go off in the warm-up with what looked like a muscle injury. So
particularly with young boys already this close, like,
yeah,
we're now within not rotating guys heading into that game at this point, I think would be kind of crazy, given that we seem to be committed to it, and to all of a sudden not start, to abandon doing that ahead of what could be the most important game of the season. So.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Brendan's so committed to it that he actually threw the players that are playing tomorrow night out of a moving bus on the way down from Dingwall past Dundee and just said, right, you guys just stay here, I'll see you on Tuesday. Alan, what's your thoughts on selection and approach to the game tomorrow night? Is it just a case of, fielding an 11 that's fit and capable of doing it and hoping that they will have what it takes given the volume of games that we've had, or where do you see us going with it tomorrow night?
I'm whilst I agree with what James is saying in terms of it makes sense and it's sensible, it's not kind of what I think I'm observing. What I think I'm observing is Rodgers putting the foot down and saying, right, let's just get as big a lead as possible in the league, not take any chances with these tricky away games, and play our strongest team. To Engels specifically, it's very interesting that he's only in the last 3 matches, Engels has played every minute bar 10, and Bernardo's played 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes that Engels wasn't on the field, and that's it. That's really quite weird. I don't know why Bernardo's suddenly only getting 10 minutes in the last 3 matches when he's, apart from the first game of the season, he's appeared. He's had more than 10 minutes in every single match, apart from one League Cup match against Hibs. So that's strange. And McCowan's had more minutes. He started 2 games in the last 3. And Hitati is only started the one at Ross County, and again wasn't terrific, if we're being honest. So I think there's still. I think Engels is the one, as I said, as I signposted last week. I think he's like becoming a starter alongside McGregor, and it's really just that other position that's up for grabs. And wouldn't be surprised if McCowan starts with Engels again away at Dundee, if I'm honest with you. But I don't see rotation for rotation's sake in terms of resting people. I think, especially with it being an away game, Rodgers is just rack up the points because we don't want to leave anything to chance. So I think we'll see a lot of rotation later in the season if the league is pretty much done, which is what we all hope for. But I'm not anticipating risks being taken in terms of, in Rodgers' mind, weakening the team for this game. That's just my view. Might be wrong, of course. This will be a tricky game. It's going to be another game of a very small pitch against a team that is, James says they're a level above Ross County. I'm not sure I agree with that. If you're looking at kind of underlying metrics, expected points, for example, based on StatSpom's probabilities that they calculate, Dundee are second bottom. In fact, there's really nothing between Ross County, Dundee, and St Johnstone. Those 3 are, kind of adrift, really, in terms of. The next team up is actually Aberdeen. No, Gavin, I'm sorry, but what the hell is going on there? But anyway, those 3 have been kind of the worst 3 all season. Dundee, if you look at post shot XG, we talk about, so these shots that are actually on target. Dundee are bottom. Dundee would be bottom of the league. What's kind of saving them at the moment is that they have the highest, by a distance, the highest XG over performance in terms of goals scored. They're 0.73 a game, scoring more than what they should at the moment. They've also got the worst XG against, and they're hitting it. They're performing to that level. So they're really bad defensive, the worst defensive team in the league, and they're overperforming in goals scored. And that's all that's kind of saving them at the moment. And as we know, that's not always going to be sustainable, really. They do.
Does
have,
that not sound a little bit like not sound a little bit like Aberdeen early in the season?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. But I disagree a little bit on midfield. They've got Lyle Cameron, he's a talented kid. They've got the lad Silla, who basically bullied the Rangers midfield a week ago. He just battered them all over the pitch, really. So they've got some talent in midfield, actually.
Well, that was actually what I meant, Alan, and apologies if I wasn't clear, is that they're a level above in midfield specifically, relative to maybe giving Engels a little bit more of a challenge than what Ross County had. Because I agree with everything else that you said there. They're right in the neighborhood of the kind of the cellar dwellers within the league.
Yeah.
Apologies for that. I just wanted to clarify.
No, that's right. The lad Adewumi, he had a good game the other night at Mulligan, I think, is a good player as well. So I think they've got a bit of talent there. It's just in defence. And then they've got Scott Carson in goal, who's really bad. So I think that doesn't help them either. So should be goals in this game for Celtic, really. Obviously, it sounds like with the weather forecast, it's going to be quite mild. So hopefully, it won't be the winter. I don't know if it's going to be windy. That probably causes even more problems than even a bit of ice on the pitch, if I'm honest. But I just think so. I think Rodgers and Celtic are in. He's got the relentless head on, especially after the Derby loss. And I don't think his ego, and I mean Rodgers here, I don't think his ego will take another bad result in the league. So much as it's sensible to rotate players, unless there's a compelling physical need, I think it'll be strongest team available.
Ego and Brendan Rodgers, don't know what you're talking about. No, speaking of somebody who's geographically anyway closest to Dundee, although not that close, it is a bit milder in Scotland this week after a bit of a cold snap the last 10 days or so. So hopefully the conditions are a little bit more in our favour tomorrow, as far as both temperature for avoiding muscle injuries and things like that, and also for the conditions of the pitch and things like that. So fingers crossed for a result we will be watching. And I have snagged a ticket to the Kilmarnock game at the weekend, so I will be seeing the boys in the flesh once again. I'll be able to actually, in fact, they'll be able to hear me because I'm actually sitting second row behind one of the goals. So I don't know what I'm going to say to them, but they will be able to hear whatever I say. So,
any chance of a pitch invasion? Can we get a little preview? I mean, that's prime real estate.
For legal purposes, I'm going to say absolutely not. I would never. However, just watch your Celtic TV closely. Hopefully, it cuts out at that point. James, before we head...
So the first time that Maeda gives the ball away, are you going to be walking out the stadium?
Absolutely. The Dysonissons.
Imagine 58,449 people booing Laura as she walks out of the stadium in the 5th minute of the game or something.
Yeah,
hilarious.
well, I'll not let the audio listeners know what I would be doing, but I'd be giving it one of them probably. But
you'd be climbing over chairs, climbing over people to get out, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. It's one thing having 140,000 people on Twitter berate you for wishing Jack Butland well, but 60,000 in your face is quite another story. Before we head off, James, what can we expect from the Huddle Breakdown for the rest of the week?
Yep. So we'll do a full analysis and workup on the game from Dundee. And notice I just said Dundee there. I did not conflate it with Dundee United for all of those people that criticize me. Well done. I know. I'm trying to get better at it. And obviously we'll preview the Kilmarnock game. Alan and I have both been kind of diving in on the transfer window, and we'll be publishing more pieces up on huddlebreakdown.com. I just did a piece basically looking at the workload of Celtic players and how that compares to Greg Taylor and Kieran Tierney, and also benchmarked our rumored interest in the Norwegian winger, whose name I will not attempt to enunciate, but put him through the normal benchmarking process and threw that up on the site yesterday as well. So there'll be more of that kind of stuff coming this week as the rumor mill continues to crank up, and eventually we'll sign somebody and then we'll do an even deeper dive. And I thought I read somewhere that Rodgers even hinted at something within 24, 48 hours. So maybe have something hard and fast to dive into within the next week.
Fingers crossed for that one. Hopefully it's a left back or a winger. That would be my preference, but I'll not sing about any of them, obviously, because that would be disrespectful to the current squad, obviously. Alan, James, thank you so very much again. It's been another wonderful week. 2 more games before I'm back on, but obviously there's plenty of content up on the Huddle Breakdown. Subscribe if you haven't. The support is very much appreciated. Alan, James, thank you very much, and we will see you all again next week.